Today I'm speaking with Professor David Miller. He's a leading academic expert on Islamophobia. And until about 2 years ago, he was a professor at the University of Bristol until the Israel lobby waged a campaign against him to have him removed from his position because of his advocacy for Palestinian rights. In the time since, he's done incredible work, not just on social media, writing threads, exposing and debunking a lot of propaganda, but also as a journalist working with Press TV in Iran, where he and I met about a month ago at the Subh International Media Festival. We were there with other journalists and academics talking about the situation in Palestine. And of course, on everyone's mind was this looming threat of war, which is now upon us. So, Professor, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
It's a pleasure. Good to see you.
It's good to see you again as well. Unfortunately, we didn't get to talk too much in person. While now that the war is upon us, I wanted to take this opportunity to hear your thoughts and get your assessment on this situation. Obviously, I think we all know how we got here, but I just want to start by asking you, what do you make of the current situation? Were you surprised when Israel carried out their attack just one day after the supposed 60-day deadline Trump provided had come to an end?
No, I wasn't surprised. I mean, I've been saying this for a long time now that that's what's going to happen. That they are going to attack Iran, and Iran should take measures prior to that, because they're absolutely going to do it. Now, others disagreed with me. I had a dispute with Craig Murray, my friend and comrade, the former British ambassador, on a show in England, where he said it's definitely not going to happen, and I said, mate, it's going to happen. We'll just have to see. And of course, I take no pleasure in saying I was right about that. Of course, they were going to attack. This is what they've been trying to do since 9/11. As we know, the famous memo, which has been much talked about in the Pentagon in the days after 9/11. They talked about six or seven countries in 7 years, and the last country in that list, of course, was Iran. And so this has been the ambition of Netanyahu and the Zionists for a long, long time, and they've been slowly working up to it. And here we are. They've launched a preemptive attack, and of course, Iran has been forced to respond with, let's remember what's called True Promise 3. And you'll recall we talked about True Promise 3 a bit in Tehran and why it hadn't been launched. We asked the people in the IRGC why it hadn't been launched, and of course their response was always the same. It was to say it's ready, it can go when the instructions come for it to go, and it will be significant. And of course, what they said was true, as it turns out, because it's been a very, very significant response to Israel. I mean, it's a very complicated question what's exactly is happening, because, of course, every aspect of this conflict is attended with massive doses of propaganda, as well as the inclarity. And the inclarity, of course, is massively helped by the Zionists' clampdown on any footage coming out. So you don't see really anything that's happening in occupied Palestine, unless it's in those places where there is such a lot of population that people capture it on their mobile phones and upload it to the internet, and then we see bits and pieces. So it's difficult to tell what's going on, but I think the shape of what's happening is becoming clearer, has become clearer in the last few days, and I can talk about that if you want.
Before we do, I want to ask you, you said that you felt as though this was inevitable, that this has been brewing since 9/11, and you mentioned this list that leaked out of the Pentagon, 6 or 7 countries with Iran being on them. Of course, we know about the Path to Persia papers and all of those different things. But this is all over the last 10 to 20 years. The Pentagon has all sorts of plans. They want to conquer the entire planet, really. What in the last 2 years made you feel like this was inevitably going to happen?
Well, it's not. That's the thing. It's not just in the last 2 years, is it? It's not just the Pentagon. It's not just 9/11. It, of course, goes back many, many years before that. It's not just that they created the so-called State of Israel in 1948, and when they did that, of course, they took much more territory than they were allowed to under the UN agreement, as everybody knows. And then they increased that territory, didn't they, in 1967, when they took the Golan and the West Bank and Gaza. And then, of course, they've been trying to increase that territory repeatedly, and that's because they have the idea of a greater Israel, uh, which, of course, in their mind, would include all of Lebanon, all of Syria, all of Jordan, part of Egypt, a little bit of Turkey, half of Iraq, and it would be effectively a Zionist imperial base in West Asia. And that's what they've always wanted to do. And of course, they can't do that until they defeat the opposition to them, which, of course, in the last 15, 20 years has been the thing which has been conjured out of nothing by, of course, the IRGC, with the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is the axis of resistance. And so what they've done is they've tried to destroy the resistance in Palestine. They failed to do that, but they are continuing to kill people at an alarming rate of knots. They tried to destroy the resistance in Lebanon. They already were remaining in occupation of part of Lebanon. They took some more territory, but they faced very, very fierce resistance from Hezbollah, and then had to withdraw from almost all of the territory, the new territory they'd taken, although they remain in some key places. They didn't destroy Hezbollah, although they damaged it quite significantly. And of course, they destroyed the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, put in place a client regime led by the CIA asset Gilani. And of course, that has allowed them much greater freedom in terms of the use of airspace to target Iran. And we just hear in the last day or so, don't we, that they have launched a further ground incursion further into Syria with the connivance of Gilani, of course, so they can place their air defense nearer to Iran. So all of that is part of this idea of a greater Israel, and of course, once they've destroyed or disabled or damaged the other resistance groups around the region, all that's left for them is to destroy Iran, and that's what they're trying to do. And I think they, of course, they believed, and what their strategy is, as far as one can see, is to launch strikes on Iran, and indeed launch preemptive strikes internally in Iran. We've seen all the reports about the Mossad agents and the vans full of drones and the attacking of the most westerly air defense of Iran. And of course, they've been saying that they have destroyed all of Iran's air defense, which doesn't seem to be true. And of course, they're trying to exaggerate that. But they launched a whole series of activities which they thought would decapitate the Iranian government. They've killed, I think, 14 extra nuclear scientists on top of the 8 they had previously killed over the last few years. They've hit the whole top echelon of the Quds Force, of the IRGC, some of the most senior Iranian military people they've killed as well. And they thought that would, one, decapitate the government, and two, would help to bring the Americans directly into the conflict. Now, that has not been successful as yet, and nor has it decapitated the capacity of the Iranian government and military forces to pummel the colony. And the pummeling that has been received from Iran, especially over the last 3 or 4 days, has been increasing really quite significantly. And the reason for that, of course, is that the air defenses of the Zionist entity have been overwhelmed and have been put out of action in many respects. I saw some reports today of the Iron Dome being used to try and take out ballistic missiles, really large ballistic missiles. Now, the Iron Dome is not for that. The Iron Dome is for short-range defense against the kinds of rockets which Hamas and Hezbollah would fire. And what's supposed to take out these ballistic missiles is the superior American THAAD system and the Arrow system, and they seem to have completely failed to do so. And they were sending Iron Dome missiles up to try and take out ballistic missiles, which had some success, it seems, but not very much success. So they are being overwhelmed. And as everyone says, who writes about these things, from Scott Ritter on one hand to other observers of the stocks of these weapons, they've got 10 or 12 days of stocks, starting about 3 or 4 days ago, until they have no more ability to defend themselves. And of course, as air defense is being depleted. The Iranians are using bigger and bigger missiles. It's not very clear whether we've got to the biggest missiles. So you'll recall when we were in Tehran, and people can look up perhaps some of the TikTok and Instagram reels of the visit we made to the IRGC's aerospace center, where all the missiles, or many of the missiles, were on display, including ones which hadn't at that point been used. And you can see the kind of missiles which they had been developing up until about 5 years ago. So the ones which were there were not new missiles, but some of them had still not been used. And it looks now like some of those missiles have been used, and these are quite some of the biggest ones you can see in the reels that you and I are in, or Max Blumenthal's in, etc. So what we're seeing is the really very significant missiles, and of course that looks like one of those missiles was what hit the command and control center, IDF command and control center, was it earlier today or yesterday? Which of course the Zionists are saying, "Oh, look, this is them deliberately targeting a hospital," which of course is not the case. There was damage to the hospital, but the target was an IDF base, which is right next to the hospital, of course. And so we're seeing the use of more and more powerful weapons, and that, of course, is really very damaging for the infrastructure and the command and control systems of the IDF and the other elements of the Israeli military. So their ability to kind of take out the Iranian government and its military forces has, I think, has been overestimated. We saw, of course, that little vignette of someone attacking Ben Gavir in the street and saying that you shouldn't have done this, you've provoked them, what have you done? And his response was to say, "Oh, but we didn't realize what missiles they had." as, as, as if this wasn't a matter of public record, and as if, I mean, it's not. I mean, the Iranians have been advertising these missiles as part of their return strategy. I think a mistaken strategy, but nevertheless, advertising these missiles for a long time in order to deter people like Ben Gavir from pushing the buttons. But there we are. That it's a complicated process, but Iran is not as easily defeated as the Zionists thought, and they will have to have American help if they are to make any progress. And if the Americans enter into that's a very significant escalation, of course, but it's also likely to not necessarily be as successful as perhaps the Zionists feel it might be. And I would just, before I finish, refer to the former senior Israeli military intelligence guy whose name now escapes me, who was on Hebrew media just the other day saying, "Look, we can't defeat Iran. It's not going to happen. We can't. We won't win." And if people say, "Oh well, we can bring the US in," well, let's remind them that the US folded after less than a month against Ansarallah. So what are they going to do against Iran? And I think that's a very thoughtful and prescient thing to say, because of course the power projection that the Americans bring is what I mean. On the one hand, it's the more sophisticated air defense. That's the THAAD system, but they've already given that to the Zionists, and there's only, I think, it looks like from what's been reported, another 60% of those still in existence that have been made. So there's not much more of that to come. And in addition to that, what you've got dominance in aircraft, which the Israelis already have, and then you have the power projection of the U.S. Naval Service. And of course, those boats are the power projection of a former era, and they are effectively floating targets, as has been seen for with Ansarallah, but also for Iran. So that closing the Strait of Hormuz and sending a couple of U.S. aircraft carriers to the bottom of the Red Sea would, I think, concentrate minds in the White House quite pointedly.
When we were in Iran, I think we saw a lot to be inspired by. You can correct me if I'm wrong here, because I don't know exactly how you perceive things, but we did have a couple conversations kind of expressing concern that we didn't feel like, I mean, obviously the Iran understood that there was risk of war, but True Promise 3 had been delayed, and a lot of people felt like they were showing weakness, which would invite aggression, which we've seen. But, after Israel's initial attack, I was very worried that potentially they could concoct some kind of fake revolution and just bring people out onto the streets, but that failed miserably. And it seems like many people who are critical of the government are actually coming out and they're releasing videos. We've seen women flicking off Netanyahu. We've seen guys who are jacked and they got like Persian symbolism tattooed all over them. They're obviously not religious, but they're condemning diaspora Iranians who are backing Israel's onslaught on Iran. And so it seems as though the people are rallying together, which is reassuring. And it is very impressive to see, despite the Mossad activities within Iran and the drones and airstrikes here and there that are, attacking and destroying decoys, but also potentially real launchers. It felt like maybe they wouldn't be able to respond. But from what I've seen in the last 48 hours, Iran has done a good job of rallying the people. The assassinations have been significantly reduced. I don't
Yeah.
think we've heard of any in a couple of days now. They're continuing to hit Israel, which is very satisfying for many of us to see. I think a lot of people after 2 years are just sick and tired of these people. I've seen even white American conservatives, MAGA, Make America Great Again, America First, and they're saying, you reap what you sow, and this is not our problem. We don't want to get into this. It seemed like Trump was going to declare war just a couple of nights ago. But it seems like he hesitated, and Tucker Carlson interviewing Ted Cruz yesterday. So the reason why I provide all this context is because Netanyahu declared at the start of this that this would last for 2 weeks. He's been saying for 2 years now that we are going to reshape the entire Middle East. He provided a very stark warning
Yeah.
to Bashar al-Assad just a couple of days before HTS launched their offensive. He had intel. He knew what they were going to do. And obviously, while Netanyahu does have his political career to worry about, Israel as a state is still supportive of the Greater Israel Project. The majority of the population support the genocide. They want to destroy Iran. So this is not just a Netanyahu war. This is an Israeli war. And they knew Iran's capabilities and they
Yeah.
knew their stockpiles. Did they take this bet, this very risky gamble, thinking the US will jump in at some point after about a week or two? Or is this part of a plan that they have potentially to degrade Iran's capabilities and strike them in ways that we can't imagine? What do you think was the Israeli calculus here?
Well, I mean, as we've been seeing, the reporting we're getting, of course, is conditional. We don't hear everything, and it's developed over the last few days. I mean, especially the last 48 hours. The onslaught. We're up to something like wave 14 of True Promise 3, and there's no sign of that ending anytime soon. So I think that looks very much like the Netanyahu aim was this gamble that to bring Trump in. He's always been trying to bring Trump in, or before him, Biden into this conflict. And it looks like that may not be successful. I mean, it could still be successful, but it's not looking so successful so far. They're promising all sorts of other trickery, aren't they? They said that Thursday or Friday this week we will see something special from Mossad, which will dwarf the pagers. Now that's in the next 24 hours. So let's see what that brings. But it's perfectly clear that the Iranian nation has come together on this. And if you look back at the statements made by the Iranian Foreign Ministry, by the president, by Zarif, his advisor, who of course is a reformist, and the statements made by people from the IRGC over the last 4 or 5 days. I mean, on the one hand, you've had statements from the Foreign Ministry saying, we're only doing this in response. If Israel stops doing what it's doing, then we will stop. We want to get back to negotiations. The Americans weren't properly negotiating, etc. That kind of statement. Now, that, of course, is completely ridiculous. Nobody in the foreign administration should be saying any such thing. On the other hand, you have people from the IRGC saying the aim of this mission is to destroy the Zionist entity and to remove it, to dismantle it altogether. And we will not stop until we do that. Now, of course, when you listen to the different statements coming out of government, they, of course, are contradictory. And of course, maybe some of them, there are different factions vying for their own interests. But it's perfectly clear that they have to do that. They can't stop and say, well, we've punished them a little bit, and let's try and negotiate now, because there is no negotiating with the Zionists. If you force them into a position where they are not able to attack you for the next 5 years, Well, that will be good for the next 5 years, but after that, of course, they will try and attack you again. The Zionists have to be maximalist; they have
And
to be
they'll
expand.
attack you all throughout. They'll
Of
attack you all
course,
throughout those 5 years anyway.
and they will lie anyhow. Yeah, of course. I mean, every word a lie. So this colony has to be dismantled, and it's perfectly clear that there are those in the IRGC who are very clear-eyed about that. I heard someone say in the Iranian government that the Israelis had made a mistake by killing some senior IRGC people who were the most reformist of the IRGC, and the people who will replace them are not reformist in that way. Now, I have no idea if that's true, but it wouldn't be too much of a surprise for that to be the case. So, there is no option. Zionism in its colony in the Levant must be collapsed, must be removed in order for there to be any possibility of peace and for a move in the world towards what should we say? Civilization is the word I would use. This is an assault on civilization by the Zionists and being supported by supposedly the mother of democracies. Well, no, that's the UK, isn't it? But the kind of leading democracy in the world, the US. But of course, this is another one in a long line of US interventions overseas, which destroys the possibility of democracy and progress and civilization.
You raise an excellent point about how Iran, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting you here, but it sounds like you're saying that it's better that this is an open war and it's a hot war and the exchanges are coming and Iran cannot put pause on that because this is the best thing to happen to Iran. Because before this, the critics of the government were very unhappy with them mostly because of the sanctions, and the sanctions weren't ever going to go anywhere. So if they're not at war, if Iran can't punish them with these missiles, then the punishment will be inflicted on them through sanctions, through protests, through information warfare. We know that Iran International and BBC Persia and all these other
Yeah,
media groups are just pumping Iran with propaganda. I mean, when we were in Iran, there were people in our group who were, interviewing people in the streets, and they said it's a mixed bag, but there are a lot of people who are saying, yeah, I don't like the government. And they're saying that openly. Now, those people thankfully have rallied around because they're patriotic and they understand that whether it's an attack on the Islamic
yeah.
Republic or Iran itself, its borders, it's still an attack on their civilization. And so that's promising to see. But yeah, it sounds like being at war is better for Iran because the population can withstand suffering that perhaps the Israelis can't. And Iran doesn't have the intelligence or the economic means to sanction Israel and punish them. So, am I correct in understanding you when I think you're saying that?
Well, of course, Iran is a subaltern power in the world system. Of course, the Zionists have the backing of the US. They have managed to successfully, effectively occupy US decision-making structures so that they can call on the US and, in fact, discipline the US if US leaders show any inclination to have their own thoughts. That will quickly be squashed out of them, as we've seen on countless occasions already with Trump and the Miriam Adelson swag bag in the background, and the Netanyahu knows that, and he says that he said this publicly on many occasions. So look, they have to defeat Zionism. And this is what these missiles are for. But there has been a process internal to Iran, which is a kind of perestroika process, which is a sort of slow collapse of the republic. I mean, the republic. When you were talking about people in the street. I mean, yeah, it's not been an Islamic republic for a very significant amount of time, and there's this internal process. And when they elected the new president, Pezeshkian, after Raisi was accidentally killed or murdered, whatever your take on that is, what you put in place was a reformist who wanted to believe the Americans, and of course the Americans lied to him, and he seemed like he was shocked when he discovered that the Americans were lying to him, and that movement to reform the republic, of course, is a movement which is suffused with a whole range of different ideological currents, but it's one which wants to play nice with the West, thinks that you can abolish the sanctions and that Iran can just be a normal bourgeois democracy, and then that America will play nice. Well, that's never going to happen. I mean, that's a fundamental misreading and a misunderstanding. One, of U.S. imperialism, and two, of course, of the Zionist entity. The Zionists will never let there be an Islamic republic because the Zionists are fundamentally hostile to the possibility of anyone doing anything which they can't control, and that's why they want to have this greater Israel. It's not that they want to necessarily have settlers living in all of their greater Israel. They want to have security control or dominance over those territories, for example, in Syria or in Lebanon, as well as having dominance over other countries in the region who've become their allies. I mean, you can see that very clearly with the UAE, with the Saudis, and the normalization process which has been going on there. And of course, they want to fit in as subaltern powers underneath the Zionists in the under the protection of U.S. imperialism. So that's what the Zionists want, and they will never stop wanting that because they can't do anything else. There isn't any other way for them to be. There's no Jewish way out of this, so that they can just be ordinary Jews and find a way to coexist with everyone else. They've been taken over entirely by Zionist ideology, which is a Jewish supremacist ideology, and wants to rule the entire region of West Asia.
So, True Promise 3 now, they've made good on their promise. It's very late, unfortunately. Perhaps it could have prevented this if it had come sooner, but that's all in hindsight. I don't have a problem discussing hindsight, but I think people are more focused on the present. And so, can't change the past, but
Mm.
we're here now. They've been delivering different waves of True Promise 3. And at this point, I think we can say that we feel as though it is sufficient. Do you think it's enough? Do you think they need to do more? There were speculative rumors about the former economic minister in Iran saying that we need to close the Strait of Hormuz. We only allow ships that we approve of for at least 100 days as a bit of a warning. I saw that it was reported by Iranian media, but I couldn't verify that it just came out of an Iranian telegram, really. So do you think they need to do more? Do they need to threaten some oil assets in the Strait of Hormuz, or do you think at this point now, despite the fact that they were delayed on True Promise 3, now that control is firmly back in the hands of the IRGC and the Ayatollah diplomatically, I suppose, do you think that they're handling the situation just fine, or do you think Iran needs to do more?
Well, look, I mean, who am I to tell the people in charge of defending their nation against this kind of onslaught? I don't know anything about their weaponry or about their strategy or anything. I don't want to be sitting here saying, well, what Iran should do is X, Y, and Z. On the other hand, of course, this is a the strategy that they had adopted previously was a strategy which they referred to as strategic patience. Now, I think with hindsight, many people are now saying that was a mistake. But let's stay with the notion of strategic patience. And of course, what you see in this precise elements of conflict is that there are straws in the wind of changing alliances. Okay. Now, one of those, of course, is that Russia seems to have backed right off. Another is the surprising, perhaps, role of Pakistan in saying it supports Iran, and of course, the third thing is the Chinese saying that they support Iran. But whether they're how significantly they're supporting that is an open question. Although, of course, we do know that those three massive cargo flights landed immediately after the Israelis started their attack. So, but let's also think about this in terms of the Gulf. Look, the obvious thing to do is to close the Strait of Hormuz and to take some of the pressure off of Iran by attacking some of the Western oil assets, in particular in Saudi and other places. And then, of course, Ansarallah and the Islamic Republic in coordination could do that perfectly easily. Now, of course, what I think they're probably doing is worrying about the extent whether that violates their strategic patience notion, and whether that will make the other Gulf nations more critical of them, and whether that will undermine their ability to find ways to get on with, I don't know, the Saudis or the UAE or Qatar, for example. Now, I think that might be a mistake, and it might be the case that that there are those in the Gulf who are U.S. allies who, nevertheless, are not particularly keen on the bombing of nuclear facilities in Iran by Israel, because of course it will mean death for the region in terms of trade for the next 20 years, because it will pollute.
So can you I want to pause you here. Can you in detail describe to us what the world would look like if this happened? So they attack the nuclear facilities, and Iran responds by destroying the oil facilities in the Gulf. Because I think a lot of people imagine, okay, a dip in the global economy because of a dip in the oil supply, which would send energy prices rising, which affects everything else. But this is like, excuse me, viewed through the lens of like a Western consumerist lens. What happens to the Gulf if their desalination plants and their oil facilities are struck?
Well, I mean, first of all, is the question of the nuclear plants. I mean, we've seen today. I think it was the Israelis struck one of the Iranians' nuclear plants, and someone referred to this as kind of Zionist masturbation, because there's no nuclear, there's no actual nuclear materials at this plant because it's still being built. So bombing it is of no real military significance. But if they strike the nuclear plants, and it is every indication they will do, that's going to mean radiation across the whole region, which will affect all the countries in the region. And mean that trade, for example, is almost impossible for years and years to come. Right, so that's a massive impact on the global economy and indeed the economies of all those countries. So of course, the Saudis aren't going to be keen on that. Saudis don't want the Israelis to bomb the nuclear facilities, and no other country in the region would want that. So that's these are the straws in the wind about the shifting alliances. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, of course, is what happens then if the Iranians respond and they take out the is it 5 desalination plants Israel has, and desalination plants in the rest of the Gulf, or the refineries, the Saudi Aramco refinery, etc., etc. Well, I mean that's a massive global slowdown in the economy and a massive hit to the economies of these nations, and these are vulnerable assets which they cannot protect. They can't protect them with air defense, and they can't protect them with their own military. So this is something which is really quite catastrophic for the region, and it would bring the region to its knees quite quickly. So that is these are cards which, if the Israelis play them, there's not really any way back from that. Of course, that looks like a third world war, doesn't it? And that's what that would be. And probably the Americans would be dragged into that. And then well, who can tell what's going to happen? But really, it may be the case that the other powers in the region actually want the Iranians to close the Straits of Hormuz, and the Iranians may be holding back from doing that in case it annoys the Saudis or the Qataris, and that may be a mistake in terms of Iranian foreign policy thinking. But I'm speculating now, of course. But that's the kind of way in which these alliances may shift, because of course nobody wants, apart from the Israelis, nobody wants massive radioactive contamination across the whole of the region, and indeed across to Africa.
Let's end with these final two questions. What sort of political decision making by Donald Trump or the Israelis will escalate this, and what sort of decisions will de escalate this?
Is well, it's difficult to see that, isn't it? Really, because I mean, if you are in the IRGC and you're saying, well, when would we stop? And I can't really see when you would stop, unless some kind of massive blow was inflicted, which cripples the government and the military. So even if the Americans come into this, I mean, it's going to mean the American ships going down, and it's going to be a profound shock for the Americans. Even though Netanyahu is boasting about the skies are free over Iran, we can bomb at will. Well, it's not going very well for them, because they are taking a lot of hits, including on their command and control structures, which of course, if they're undermined, that means the IDF can't fight anymore. So I don't know that there can be any de-escalation. I don't think that uh, the, the Zionists don't appear to have any off ramp, and that, of course, what would they do? Say, "Oh, we're sorry, we'll not do it again," or I mean, what would they do? So I don't see any off ramp in that respect, and I think the only outcome that can save the region from utter disaster is the defeat of the Zionists.
I have to agree with you there. I also can't imagine how this can de-escalate at this point, especially given, as you described at the start of this conversation, Israel's commitment to this greater Israel project, and also just their collapse of public support in the United States. I think the numbers are far worse than what Pew Research revealed like 6 weeks ago with their polling. We have
Yeah, yeah.
seen like there is a fierce debate taking place on the right now. We have to give a lot of credit to MAGA and these America Firsters that are um, really waging war on social media, in the comment section, and on these videos and these interviews with Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz. And there's just a fierce battle taking place. And you can tell that Donald Trump is affected by this. It really bothered him when Tucker Carlson kind of called him out. And he obviously has to pay attention to these kinds of things. I don't know what sort of effect this would have because the politically, most people aren't really engaged in the conversation. There are millions of Americans who are plugged in, but in comparison to the rest of the population, the American plebs are just gambling and drinking and consumed with entertainment and work and living their lives and things like that. But for those who are interested in the conversation, they are seeing right through the propaganda and they are calling this out relentlessly. So,
Oh, but I think it's worse than that. I mean, I think it's worse than that. I think so. I mean, when you're talking, I mean, that proportion of the population which you're talking about is what, 60%, 70% of the population, maybe. But they are all seeing, as is the case in this country as well, the 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 collapse of the rules of the society, and what the value of the MAGA attack on Israel First is that all of that is very easy to blame on giving all the money to Israel. And I think that's an indication that actually the kind of pressure that they may face is much worse than they think it might be. It's much worse than just Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson or whoever else. It's actually much wider in the society than perhaps they are willing to appreciate. I mean, that guy who was removed from the Joint Chiefs of Staff office
right from the
just the
Pentagon.
other
Yeah.
day for referring to Israel as a death cult. I mean, it's not language I would use, but it's not. I mean, it's kind of ballpark of the kind of things I say about
Yeah.
Zionism. But I mean, that's extraordinary, isn't it? So
Yeah.
that is affecting even the Pentagon, right?
Yes.
So that's really very
So
significant. And the
let me
more that
ask you
that
this:
gets
you have the divide of the people, but then the power structures that you described, the decision making structures, are fully occupied essentially by the Zionists. So
yeah.
how does that play out when you have this sort of divide where now there's a complete inversion? Like public support is gone, and you have dissenters within the government, but then you have these decision makers that could stay there. I mean, who's going to remove them? These are unelected positions, a lot of them.
Well, I mean, there's an analysis, isn't there, on the right about taking back our nation in the UK and in America, and it has different inflections, and of course, it partly is to do with white supremacy and migration and all that stuff, right? But it also has a resonance for the idea of Zionist occupation of the decision making apparatus of the government. In the US, of course, it's much more advanced, I guess, but it's also very significant here in the UK, where the Zionists more or less control foreign policy and they control some aspects of domestic policy too. So I think I mean, what we've seen from the genocide and the kinds of research that I've been doing on the Zionist movement outside occupied Palestine in the UK and Germany and France and the US, you know, what is required is not just the dismantlement of the colony in Palestine, but the dismantlement of the Zionist movement inside the US and inside the UK, and that's a
How
huge,
does that happen?
huge thing. Well,
How does that happen?
it happens, I mean, because people internally start to fight back against it, because the movement outside starts to target Zionist organizations. We have a model for this, don't we? And the model for this is that there are people in the Pentagon saying that Israel's a death cult. The model is the case taken against the JNF in Canada to close down JNF Canada. These things can be replicated and spread much more widely, so that Zionist organizations have no freedom to operate. They start to get closed down. People are disestablished from their key positions in neocon think tanks and in the Pentagon and in the State Department, and indeed in the Treasury Department, a crucial department which is controlled by Zionist ideologues as well. So all of that is a huge convulsion in American or British politics. But that's what's required as well. We can't. It's not just a matter of Iran defending the whole world by collapsing the entity there. We have to collapse the Zionist movement in every country in which it's formally organized, and in every country in which it has significant influence. And those are huge, huge things to do, but they're required. But otherwise, the Zionists will kind of metastasize and reinvent themselves and maintain their grip on power.
Professor, it was a pleasure having you. Hopefully we can do this more often, as your perspective on this conflict is going to be increasingly important as time goes on. I think you have a perspective and an understanding that that many would appreciate. And, having been there yourself and also working with Press TV, I don't know if you're still working with them or not.
Sure.
Right. So you have a perspective I think that's important right now. And so I'd like to bring you back on if we can. But before we go, I'd like my audience to know where they can follow you. Your is at Tracking Power on X. Isn't that correct?
So tracking_power, yes. So that's my
Tracking_power. And
X
I'll
account.
flash it on the screen when I edit this. Yeah.
Also on Instagram and TikTok, it's the same, I think. Yeah. So.
Okay. And is there anything that we need to look out for next coming from you? Do you have an article coming out soon, or
Well,
a
I've
thread you've been working on?
published one yesterday, which it might sound like it's really kind of quite obscure, but it's about the history of the Zionist movement in Scotland, which is where I'm from in the UK. And as I said, it sounds like it's parochial, but actually it's an attempt to show how deeply embedded Zionism is in countries in the West, and therefore to try and understand what we'd have to do to disestablish it and disembed it from the society. So that's on Mint Press. So I'm doing much more work on Mint Press these days. So I should have an article out every couple of weeks or so.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you very much.
Trust nothing.